This is our 56th lesson on the biblical flood. I'm Marion Fox teaching, and we're using my book, the second edition of my book that I'm in the process of revising the first edition. Actually, I'm mostly not revising so much as I'm adding more material to it. Now, we're going to look at the age of the universe and the solar system. This gets into some technical matters, and I'll admit that, but I think we have to do this. The age of the universe and solar system, we want to see if the dating of the age is really has real substantial evidence to support it. It's evident that if the atheistic models are true, the age of the Earth cannot be greater than the age of the sun. And so that cannot be the case if their models are true as to how the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth all came into existence. The age of the sun is important to give an outside range for the possible ages for the earth and the life on the earth. Now, if someone wanted to know my age, they could say, all right, when was his father and when was his mother? When were they born? And you'd have an outside range for how old I could be, because I cannot be older than my father and mother, obviously. So right here, the age of the sun is important to give an outside range for the possible age for the earth and for life on the earth. And so we're dealing with atheists, of course. And so keep that in mind. If the sun is not billions of years old, as atheists claim, then the earth is not billions of years old. And so with their model, it can't be. They can't claim it. If we can prove the sun is young, not billions of years old, we have disproven the claim that the earth is billions of years old. Now, stars are said to be several million light years from the earth. This is used to prove the universe is extremely old, several billion years old. So they argue that the stars are that far away. Now, there's several ways of measuring the distance to stars. Parallax is one of the methods that's used, but we won't go into parallax because parallax doesn't get to far distant stars anyhow. So we won't deal with it. Now, if the doctrine of a full-grown creation, which we had in an earlier lesson, is true, it would explain how the stars could appear old. They were created in place, in situ, in position. And as we pointed out, the whole forest had to be created. And I would argue then that not only were forests created so the birds could inhabit them, animals could inhabit them, but we didn't have just two deer created. There was a whole bunch of them. And so there were large numbers of them with a wide variety of genetic diversity. And these were created at the creation. But of humans, there was only two created, Adam and Eve. Adam created first and Eve second. So the doctrine of a full-grown creation is true. It explained how the stars could appear old. We'll get into that a little further. If the stars are really several million light years from the earth, God could have created the stars with light in place between the star and the earth, but this creates some other problems. So, but we don't get into that. That's a possibility. That's one possible explanation. We're going to look at all the possible explanations. I'll give you the position that I will think is most reasonable and probably the correct one. Some of the methods that have been used to measure the distance from the Earth to the star are based on assumptions which might not be true. We'll be looking at these assumptions as we go through. Our lesson tonight won't be as long as our normal lesson because of the material just broke. And so we'll have probably about 40 minutes of class, 35, 40. One of the assumptions that atheists make, and not only atheists, but old Earth creationists make this assumption as well, is that the light from the star has been traveling for several million years to reach the Earth. And then that theory about it is inserted into the argument that the star is several million years old. Of course, this is a classic example of circular reasoning. So you make the assumption about the light from the star been traveling, and then you based on that assumption, you insert that in the argument for the age, and you get several million or billion years old. Yes, star, and for the Earth itself, obviously. For those who believe the universe is young, less than 20,000 years old, there are seven possible explanations of the presence of light from the stars, which are several billion light years away. Now, a light year is not time. Light year is a distance. It is the distance. One light year is the distance that light would travel in 1 year, assuming that light is traveling at the speed of 186,000 miles per second. So you multiply the number of seconds in a year times 186,000, you'd have the distance of a light year in miles. Be enough. So here are your seven possible explanations for these light years, these stars being several billion light years away from the Earth. That's the distance. The stars, first explanation, the stars are not that far away. Possible. These are logically possible. Now, I'm not saying that they are correct. Just saying from logic, here are the ways we could possibly explain them. And the second, the speed of light has been changing and slowing down. Now, that's a possibility. And there are some arguments made for that happening. The third is that the light was created already in space or in situ between the star and the Earth. And of course, there's some problems with that as well. The fourth one is the universe did not begin with a Big Bang. It was created. And of course, I don't believe that it was created with the Big Bang. It was created by God. And the fifth one is the light travels in a different manner than it is thought to travel. That is, space is Riemannian instead of Euclidean. Now, we'll talk about that in just a minute. I think this is a very distinct possibility. We're looking at Riemannian space. There's another book that was written by a man named Humphreys, and he argues that time is advancing at a different rate in different parts of the universe due to the general theory of relativity. And Humphreys, in his arguments on his book, of course, I have his book and have studied it, and it makes some pretty good sense too. So Humphreys, and we believe a creationist. And then the seventh one is there's some other unknown explanation that we don't know about, that we haven't learned or haven't figured out. It's like the atheist with his Big Bang theory has a problem with the redshift not always being redshift, a problem with the missing mass and some other factors as well. Now, there's some other unknown explanation, or maybe a known explanation even, that we haven't come up with yet. The nature of space is different in different parts of the universe. I developed this in lesson 44. So we developed this. Now we know that the speed of light is not constant in space because some parts of space where there's a strong gravity, the fabric of space is actually warped. And so light goes through it like with a lens. It's called a gravitational lens. And they actually have them, and they found them, and they know they exist. So what this means is when light goes through a lens, it is refracted. Now, light can be refracted or reflected, absorbed, and so forth. But light, when it's refracted, the speed of light through the medium where it's refracted, like it would through a lens, like your glasses or a lens of some sort, that will, a prism, for example, then that would change the speed of light. The speed of light changes when it enters that medium. Most of the time in lenses, it'll slow down. And so it slows down as it goes through that medium. And so it changes its speed, the light does. Now here's what we run into. Lenses then act upon refraction, which means the speed of light is changed in that medium. Well, space gets warped and the speed of light changes, and it acts like a lens. And so that tells me that the fabric of space can be changed and change the speed of light. And we dealt with that in lesson 44. I don't see how that can be answered. And we set forth that the scriptures talk about God stretching the heavens out. We had a number of passages that showed that to be the case. God describes it, the scriptures describe it in that way. So if the fabric of space is stretched out in different parts of the universe, then the speed of light would be different in different parts of the universe. And so this would be a factor that would be something that definitely would throw off their measurement of time and make the measurement of time invalid. And this is a book that's really good. I believe that this, he was a physics professor at El Paso, I think it was, the University of Texas at El Paso, I think it was, a physics professor. But I think Barnes is dead. I'm pretty sure he's retired if he's not hadn't passed away. But he has a real good book. It's got some real good material in it. He discusses the Riemannian or elliptical space extensively on pages 22, 28 through 97. And Moon and Spencer also discuss it in an article in a journal. Now, Zagi, Z-A-G, I think the E is pronounced, has an interesting discussion of hyperbolic or non-Euclidean space. Now, on pages 289 to 294 in his article, interesting discussion. When we get into geometry, there are three forms of geometry that we normally find out in mathematics. Euclidean geometry, which we study usually in our secondary schools and even in undergraduate geometry classes in college. But if you get into some graduate courses, you may get into non-Euclidean geometry. That would be such things as we see, hyperbolic and elliptical geometry, Riemannian geometry. And what we have here, Moon and Spencer calculated the time for light to travel from a star that was 10,000 light years away in Euclidean space, which is what we study in public schools. And they determined with Riemannian geometry, Riemannian space, if space is Riemannian, that it's only 15.7 years. It would travel that distance in 15.7 years. Now, if you've ever studied navigation, and I've studied a little bit of navigation, but if you study navigation, ships or airplanes will travel the Great Circle route to navigate on the globe. But we won't get into that any further, but I would just point out that they don't travel in what we normally think the straight distance. So they travel because the Earth itself is curved. Riemannian space. So 10,000 light years away, the light would get there in 15.7 years. Now then, Moon and Spencer also show us that if a star was an infinite distance away in Euclidean space, it would only take the light 15.71 years to travel from the star to the observer. And that kind of bothers people, but that's the way the math would work out and with Euclidean space, with Riemannian space now. And so, yeah, we're talking Riemannian space now, keep that in mind. Humphreys cites papers that discuss several severe problems with the Moon-Spencer theory. And he does discuss it, some papers, but I believe that the Moon-Spencer theory has some credibility. So if we go back now with this, what we're saying on this Moon-Spencer, that the farthest you could get away in time for any light, if space is Riemannian, is 15.71 years in time. So in 15.71 years from the furthest part of the universe the light could get to the Earth in that short period of time. Now, it is. And so you say, well, why are you on this Riemannian geometry? Albert Einstein assumed that space was curved or Riemannian, according to Wolfson and Pascal. This is a physics book used in universities. And that at that time was not constant in order to postulate his general theory of relativity. His general theory of relativity is a theory relating to gravitation, relating to gravity. So right here, he assumed it's Riemannian or curved, and time the time was not constant in order to postulate that general theory of relativity. And the general theory of relativity is thought to be true by a physicist. And if he were correct, either space is Riemannian or time varies. And so either case here. And basically, he's arguing both of them are true. Space is Riemannian and time varies. So the points made in this section are correct. You cannot date anything older than about 15.7 years if space is Riemannian by star light. And those stars would be more than 15.7 years away from us in time. The light. Now, if he was incorrect about the constancy of the speed of light, then redshift did not occur from the Doppler effect, and Hubble's method today in the universe is incorrect. Again. So we've already proven that the speed of light is not constant in the universe because space around gravity fields, such as stars and so forth, we have gravitational lenses. And these can create a place where light changes its speed. Refraction it amounts to a change in the speed of light due to the medium changing. Black holes themselves are objects of such density that an escape speed exceeds that of light. So this gravity is so strong that light can't even get out of it, making it impossible for anything to escape their gravitational grip, Wolfson and Pascal say. Now, here's what has to happen then. If we throw a baseball up, to illustrate this, we throw a baseball up, gravity eventually pulls it down. Now, if we can shoot it out fast enough, it'll get escape velocity and escape the Earth's gravity. But if it doesn't have enough speed, or escape velocity is not up around 20,000 miles per hour, 25,000 miles per hour, and if it doesn't have that escape velocity, then it will be pulled back by Earth's gravity. Well, a black hole, it sucks light back in. So what happens when a ball goes up and you throw it up in the air and it comes flying back down? Well, what happens is it reaches the top of its arc. If we threw it exactly straight up, it would go straight up. It would stop momentarily and then start accelerating down. So it would have zero velocity at some time. So what this is saying, if black holes suck light back into them, they attract it back in with their gravity, then gravity can actually make light, speed of light go to zero. And that would be a situation where that means the speed of light is a variable. Holes are also called gravitational singularities as well. That's another name for them. If it's assumed that black holes exist, then either space must be Riemannian or time changes at different rates in different parts of the universe of the general theory of relativity, as Humphreys discusses it. And so Humphreys makes argument from that. Humphreys' book, I believe, is very credible. As proof of this assertion, I offer two arguments. First, if light is emitted perpendicular to the surface of the black hole, it must decelerate to zero speed in order to be drawn back into the black hole by the massive gravity if space is Euclidean. Second, the argument can only be escaped by arguing that space is Riemannian, that the speed of light is not constant, the general theory of relativity explains the phenomenon. In either instance, it's impossible to accurately date the age of the universe by Hubble's law or by any other method relating to the speed of light. So again, if space is Riemannian, you don't have any light that is more than 15.71 years away in time. And if space has variable speed of light as it stretches out, which I think is quite likely to be the case, then what we have there is we can't measure it either by time, because we're placing the different areas of the space with having different velocities of light. And we're trying to compare one area to another, and the velocities are not constant. There's strong evidence, I believe, that the general theory of relativity is valid. Humphreys has the most reasonable explanation of this problem, in my view. So I would encourage you to obtain Humphrey's book. I believe it's very good. While the age of the universe does not directly relate to the dating of the Genesis flood, it's important to the age of the Earth. So we can't date the universe by starlight. Can't be done. It's not valid. That's an invalid method. And so we can't get light more than, if it's Riemannian, more than 15.71 years away. But this light would be here in 15.7 years, 71 years. Age of the universe, again, is known to be less than the age of some stars. Now, this is quandary. Of course, that's impossible and creates a problem for the atheist. Now, here's a quote for us, and I'll give you the side here. Technologists caught up with Edwin Hubble's question of the 1920s. What are the scale and the age of the universe? Preliminary answers given last month by Pierce et al. And strongly backed up on page 757 of this issue by Freeman et al. Indicate that the universe is younger than its oldest stars. An apparent impossibility would force a re-examination of our universe model, how stellar ages are measured, Jacobi tells us. And that's one of those things that I don't know how that got published. Okay. But because it just flies in the face of so many atheists. They've got a problem with their whole system. We've noted already that they have a hard time getting stuff like that published, but this was published. So it must have had some pretty good reason to back it up. Otherwise, they wouldn't have published it, even if it were true. This demonstrates that there's some inherent error in their methodology for determining the age of the universe. And at least one inherent error, perhaps many, perhaps more than one. Interpretation of this information that the Hubble telescope has discovered has been questioned by several astrophysicists. They've immediately begun to jump on it and question it. And Cohen, we have a reference there at Cohen, page 198. Other problems of dating the age of the universe are pointed out in the July 1994 issue of Sky and Telescope, page 14. This is not considered a highbrow journal to publish in, however. Keep that in mind. Now, what we get into here is we have the question of the nature of reality. In philosophy, we have what's called ontology. What is real? From ontos, the Greek word ontos, real. And we must understand the nature of reality in order to determine whether or not God exists. Well, this is a legitimate question. The question of the nature of reality can be summarized in the following disjunctive syllogism. Here's our argument when we look at it. Either only matter is eternal, or only mind is eternal, or both mind and matter are eternal. Now, there's another possibility, is that nothing exists. It's all a figment of our imagination. and where the imagination would come from. So we have one philosopher said, "I think, therefore I am," and Descartes, D-E-S-C-A-R-T-E-S, Descartes said that. So I'm thinking, therefore I exist. They begin at that point to prove that he did exist, and so that was the beginning point. But either only matter is eternal or only mind is eternal, or both are eternal. Now, what the atheist has claims only matter is eternal, because they're basically materialists. Materialism says only matter or material things exist. The atheist generally claims then is, and you say, well, what's our mind? Oh, it's just a bunch of electrical signals in the body, electrochemical signals. That's all it is. And so that complexity of the mind then is just poo-pooed away as just being electrical signals, random electrical signals somehow. Scriptures plainly state that God is eternal and God is not physical. So we won't have time to develop that in great detail, but the scriptures say in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God existed before the heavens and the earth existed. He created them. And this God is Elohim. And so it's referring to the Godhead, the Father, Son, and the Spirit. And Exodus 3:14, when God is speaking to Moses, and God said unto Moses at the burning bush, I am that I am. When Moses said, what's your name? He said, I am that I am. Now, this is an odd saying to us. I exist because I exist. I'm self-existent. And I was uncreated. I'm the uncreated cause of all other things. And that's what he's saying here. That's what this is actually saying in the Hebrew. And so this is the verb form of the word for Jehovah or Yahweh. And Jehovah or God's Elohim said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus saith thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. So I exist because I exist. The atheist claims the Christian is unscientific and unreasonable to accept miracles, such as the creation, because of the principle of uniformity. Now, the principle of uniformity says, now, don't confuse with uniformitarianism. They sound the same, but they're not the same thing. The principle of uniformity says the laws of nature apply at all times and in all places. The same laws apply at all times and in all places. Well, we've already seen the atheists are not consistent here, because they don't say in the Big Bang the laws of nature applied. There was a time when they didn't apply. Then they began to apply after the Big Bang, at a certain time after the Big Bang. So they don't even adhere to it themselves, principle of uniformity. The atheist does not have the laws of nature to apply at all times, always, because of at least two different laws of science. Now, here's two laws of science that just shoot them down. And this is, if you take general physics in college, you'll get both of these laws. And you should get them in the chemistry class as well. First, the first law of thermodynamics, essentially, if we might just boil it down, states that matter cannot either be created or destroyed. It's neither created nor destroyed. That's the first law. And that, if we might summarize it. The second law states it is impossible, Wolfson and Pascal state, to conduct a heat engine operating in a cycle that extracts heat from a reservoir and delivers an equal amount of work. In other words, nothing is 100% efficient. And so you can't pull energy out of one place and get all the energy out and use all the energy. You can't extract it and use it. It's not 100% efficient. Everything is wearing out, if you might want to put it this way. Nothing is 100% efficient. In effect, everything's wearing out. It's another way of saying it. Nothing is improving or building up or even staying constant. The heat is being dissipated into unusable states. It's unusable for us. This is called the principal entropy. It's illustrated by this quote. We started this chapter by arguing that natural processes are generally irreversible. So all your natural processes are irreversible, going from ordered states to disordered states. That's entropy. It's the loss of order as when a hot and a cold object eventually reach the same temperature that makes energy unavailable to do work. Eventually, you have to have a difference in temperature to do that work, difference in energy level. Now, for example, if we wanted to lift a mass up in the air, we could use that weight of that mass to lift something up. But the friction in the system would cause it, we wouldn't be able to lift, do the amount of work that it took to get the mass up in the air. It would have to keep adding energy to it. We can't do that work and just have it be 100% efficient. Next slide, let's look at it. Entropy is the measure of this disorder. Given the tendency of systems to evolve toward disordered states, we can make a statement about entropy that is, in fact, a general statement of the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is the entropy of a closed system can never decrease. In other words, the entropy can never decrease. Entropy is the amount of disorder. It'll become more and more disordered. That is, the heat from one side will become the two objects which are different temperatures will eventually become the same temperature. Out of energy is that we have is the difference between one source in one place and another location, and one device and another device. And that's how we can do work. But if both systems have the same temperature, you can't do any work with it. So the second law of thermodynamics is the entropy of the universe can never decrease. So the whole universe, it applies. Wolfson and Pascal claim it applies to the universe. I agree with them. I believe they're correct. From these two laws of thermodynamics, first and second law, and the principle of entropy is derived from the second law, all systems are less than 100% efficient. That means matter cannot exist forever. These apply only to the physical realm. They don't apply to God because God is not physical and these don't apply to God. The Bible clearly tells us it doesn't apply to God. This, it's plain that matter cannot be eternal. Since matter cannot be eternal, something else has to be eternal. And it's the eternal mind of God that's eternal. A being that's a spirit being, not subject to the laws of thermodynamics. This argument forces the atheist to either deny these laws of science or deny that mind is separate from matter or deny both. And so they wind up really denying both of these. The proof that matter cannot be eternal has driven some atheists to the ridiculous, absurd assertion that matter has created itself. So matter created itself. Lindy, page 48 to 55, we see this. That's an assertion that something has come from nothing. Now, when I studied mathematics, I learned that you add 0 to 0, you still have 0. If you take 4 and add 0 to it, you still have 4. You don't get something for nothing. Now, I know I'm jokingly say politicians try to tell people they get something for nothing, but they don't. Somebody has to pay for it. So there's no such thing as a free meal. Somebody has to pay for it. So the assertion that something has come from nothing is absolutely ludicrous when they think about it. It's incredible to me that rational person that makes such an assertion. I find it incredible that rational people would make it. But you know, they're forced to it because they can't claim to their atheism unless they make that assertion. This concludes our lesson here now. And Are there any questions or comments that you have before we stop recording?